Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so happy that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Lorenzo Gomez. He'll be talking to us about his wonderful middle grade book, Tafolla Toro, 3 Years of Fear. Before we invite Lorenzo in, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by God Always Hears, a beautiful picture book by Kelly Gretler. You know, hospitals can be incredibly overwhelming and scary for anyone, especially children. I mean, there's doctors, needles, tests, beeping sounds, and on top of that, you're feeling worried, helpless, tired, and sick. It can be really hard finding calm within that storm, but it's really, really important. By letting go of what they can't control, children are able to gain a sense of peace, which is paramount to their healing. And that's what God Always Hears is all about. This really is a beautiful, a stunningly beautiful picture book. And we had the book at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair, and people were just drawn to the art. And the amazing thing about this art is that it was created by a 12-year-old girl, Solomia Kalinchenko. And it's just amazing. You just have to check out this book, God Always Hears, Kelly Gretler. It's available on Amazon. Speaking of beautiful illustrations that perfectly complement a story, we need to let you know about Lucas and the Game of Chance. It's another book that we had on display at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair. Lucas and the Game of Chance is written by Anthony Manna, Dr. Tony Manna, and it was illustrated by Donald Babbage. Tony and Donald were on the podcast not too long ago. This is a fantastic book. While Lucas is playing his flute at the seawall one day, he befriends a mysterious talking, dancing snake that rewards him with fortune and favor. Some years later, tempted by greed and pride, Lucas loses all his riches and his family. He must now set off on a treacherous journey through a frightening forest filled with suspense and strange creatures to find destiny. Her son, Ilion, the sun, and her daughter, Luna, the moon. These celestial gardens will surely allow him to reverse his fortune, restore his honor, and win back all that he loves and treasures. Won't they? This is an absolutely perfect book to read with your tweens and teens. It's Lucas and the Game of Chance by Anthony Manna, available at Amazon. Joining us on the line right now from San Antonio in Texas, he is the author of a really powerful middle grade book that's going to make a difference in a lot of kids' lives. The name of the book is Tafolla Toro, 3 Years of Fear. Please welcome to the show, Lorenzo Gomez. Lorenzo, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm really excited to be here because Tafolla Toro follows your life in middle school.
That's right.
Tell us about the story and that experience.
So I wrote this book. So this book is a mental health book. It's funny because I never set out to write a mental health book, but this is a mental health book about the biggest struggles of my life, which is dealing with fear and anxiety. And, the Tafolla to me is this really interesting place because it was my middle school. I went there in the early 90s. And what I didn't know until I started researching in preparation for the book was there was just this cocktail for really, really, just crazy stories, in the 90s. And so, when I went to Tafolla, it was in the middle of a 10-year spree where San Antonio experienced its highest levels of gang violence. And the second year I was there was the highest, year for drive-by shootings. There was 3.5 drive-bys, every day that year. Oh. And the middle school is, like right next to the county jail, so you can see it wherever you are in the school. And it's right across the streets from one of the oldest housing projects in the country. Eleanor Roosevelt had to help negotiate to get them built because there was a union dispute. And so it's kind of that's sort of this eerie backdrop. And 12-year-old me rolls up to this school and just experienced a lot of things that I wasn't prepared for in my environment. And so many years later, going through therapy, I sort of realized that so many of the root cause of so many of my issues had to deal with this time period in my life. And so this book is about addressing those stories and then helping my 12-year-old self / the reader really work through some of the same issues if they're dealing with it as well.
Well, I think I need, before we go any further, I just need to say that I have yet to meet a 12-year-old who, or many 15-year-olds, or even many people my age, which is close to 100, that are mentally prepared to kind of deal with the situation that you were speaking about. Living in a world, and for a lot of kids, their neighborhood is their world. Living in a world where 3 people are shot every day, that's craziness. And no one should have to live through that. And I don't think anybody is really truly prepared to live through that.
Yeah. No, I agree with it. And I tell a lot of stories, in the book. And so the way that I wrote the book is it's 12 chapters of stories. And after every chapter, I write a letter from adult me to 12-year-old me. And each letter contains at least 2 or 3 mental health principles that I've learned. They're clinical principles that I've learned in therapy. And so one of the letters is talking about how one of the first developmental needs you need as a child is to feel safe. And I realized quickly when I was going to therapy that I did not have that. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that it was Tafolla's fault, and it wasn't that it was my parents or the adults' fault. The environment of the city was just not safe, and that was really no one's fault. But it did have an effect on me, and so you sort of deal with it. And I tell this story about towards the middle of the end of the book, I was in the middle of a drive-by accidentally where I was in between the car that was shooting, like I was in between the house and the car that were shooting at each other. And but the reason how I got there was every time there would be a drive-by in my neighborhood, the mothers would always get notified by the sons. They said, "Hey, we just shot up this house. They're going to come back and shoot us." So the mothers would go stay at another house, and they would tell all the mothers around. So my mother got notified. But it became so commonplace that this one day I thought, man, I really want to drink a soda. Like I really want a Sunkist. And I thought, you know what? I have enough time to go get a soda before this drive-by happens. And so that's what I was thinking. I was like, I think I have enough time. So I went to go get the soda, and as I was walking down the street, I was caught in the middle of it. But you just think how crazy it is now looking back. But that's how sort of desensitized I was to the environment. And so what I try to do in the book for the reader is to say, hey, that environment's not cool. And if you feel like it's your fault or you're defective, that's not a true story you're telling yourself. The environment wasn't safe, and that's not good.
Yeah. It angers me that you had to grow up in that kind of situation, and it angers me that there are thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of kids who have to live through that in that kind of environment today here in the States.
Yeah, it really is. And so, I mean, I think that to me, this is really kind of the grand mission that I'm on with this book, is to say, hey, you know what? Fear and anxiety is something that I think so many people deal with that nobody talks about. And so I want my book to be this example of going first and saying, hey, I'm going to tell you how I grappled with it. And the stories are hopefully my credentials to say, hey, this guy actually knows what it's like. And actually, I'll tell you just a quick story. I was at an event where there was a local network here in San Antonio, and they really loved the book. So they organized 1,000 high school kid event, and they bought a book for every kid. And this one kid came up to me, really sweet, and he said, hey, I read your book and I really loved it. And my favorite story is the story of your first day, because it's exactly how my first day went. And it sort of broke my heart, because my first day of middle school in the book is just a terrible, terrible day. But I realized that what this kid was actually telling me was, I'm very thankful that someone actually knows what I was going through and what I felt. And it was his way of saying, you know how I felt, because I felt that way. And I thought I was the only one that felt that way. So it was very validating.
I guess anybody listening, hearing the way you grew up could sit back and say, oh, I absolutely understand how this was devastating and probably cause PTSD in middle grade you. But a kid doesn't have to grow up in that kind of chaos to be traumatized and fearful in middle school.
That's exactly right. I actually think that kids these days probably have, it's different, but in many ways it's the same or worse, which is, at Tafolla, we had a real big problem with gangs, and there was a lot of gang violence. But when I compare it to today, back then I could go home, go to my room and feel safe. Mm-hmm. But I did not have a phone back then. And so can you imagine going into my room and opening up my smartphone and having someone taunting me or harassing me, on Facebook direct message or Instagram DM. And I just realized that back then I could go home and be safe. And today the trouble has a way through technology to go into the bedroom with you and not leave you alone. And so I think that it's the reason why I wanted to put these principles out there, is to say, hey, it doesn't matter where the fear and anxiety is coming from, right? Maybe you weren't dodging bullets, but human nature doesn't change and these things still exist. And so here is a set of tools that I learned how to cope with them, and they've been so helpful that I want to share them with you and also share it through my story.
Absolutely. And parents, any parent listening out there needs to understand, Lorenzo mentioned, taking his phone into the bedroom. And I know a lot of you are very responsible and make sure that your kids put the phone in the kitchen and you take the phone at the end of the night when they go up to their room. But understand that their tablet, they get on social media through their tablet, through their laptop, through all those devices. So, if you don't want your kid,
there's so many opportunities.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you can get on social media through video games.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly, anywhere where you're going to have interactions with people, it's technology is a tool. And I think that in the hands of a bully, you can still use the same tool that everybody else is using, just using it to do harm. Mm-hmm. And so to me, and one of the examples I like to give people is I use most of the same social media that most kids do. And I have a personal boundary because I have a problem with Twitter, which is when I'm on Twitter, it can get so political and so divisive that I can feel my heart rate speeding up and getting angry. So I have a personal boundary, which is I just don't have it on my phone. So if I want to log in, I got to go to an actual computer. Mm-hmm. And so most of the day I'm, doing meetings and doing all this stuff. And so it's just a personal boundary, which is, it's not that I deleted Twitter. I just don't have it on my phone. Mm-hmm. And so I think the question that I ask young people is, are there some boundaries that you need when it comes to the tech? Because maybe you don't, but some people might need to have some boundaries or have an adult help them create a healthy boundary so that they can use it and it doesn't turn from being a helpful tool, which is what technology is, to being something that ends up hurting you inadvertently.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about technology and about social media is, you can understand that, politics, that can make you crazy and people can go overboard and have all these battles. And if you're talking about different religions and, it's a shame, but you can understand people from different religions getting into arguments and whatnot. I don't go on and there are a lot of the boundaries that I put up is I don't discuss religion with people in my own church because you start and I think, I think this way, and it's like, and I'm like, okay, I'm out. I'm not.
That's exactly right. No, you're right, and I think that to me it's this, it's also, so it's funny you say it because one of the lessons that I put in the book in a letter to my 12-year-old self is about the power of words and how words really do have power and and I talk about it in a two-pronged approach. The first one is, what is the story that you tell yourself, right? So you can tell yourself that you're worthless and unloved and terrible, and that's not true. But the other thing is, when you speak words to someone else, you are affecting their life. And there's a story at the end of my book where I was playing basketball and I was really fast and we were playing against these really hardcore gangster dudes from the projects and they couldn't catch me. And one of them got really frustrated and he yelled to everybody, he said, "Hey, somebody step on that roach." Everybody died laughing. And from that moment, for the rest of my tenure at Tafolla, my nickname became Roach. And one of the things that happened was I made a decision to not allow that story to be that I'm this insect that people want to step on. And so I couldn't stop them from calling me Roach, but I made a decision that it wasn't going to be my worth. And I put it in a letter to my 12-year-old self to say, hey, like, if you could have told yourself the story, which is I'm this worthless insect to be stepped on, but you didn't, and that's a good job. But the other thing that I want to put out there, and I put it in the letter, is what are the words you're saying to other kids? Because if you are making fun of someone and you think it's innocent, you actually might be just like the guy who called me Roach, right? So don't be that guy in their story, right? You need to be lifting people up with your words, but they do have power.
And that's one of the things that I think is so hard for, probably for girls too, but especially guys growing up in inner city kind of school systems. I grew up in that type of neighborhood, and a lot of the fun that we had was just goofing on each other. And in every neighborhood has their own expression for it, but it's just teasing each other and joking, and most of it is harmless. But a lot of times there's a line that gets crossed, and no one realizes that line gets crossed, and some real hurt can come out of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's, and I think you're right. I think that I think that step one is just being aware and being on the lookout. And so I think that, if I was going to advise my nephews and nieces or anybody that's in high school or middle school, I think my goal is to have them be aware of it. Say, hey, I'm not saying you can't plan around and joke around. I mean, I love a good laugh, and I love a good story and comedy, but just be aware that, when you let things rip, if it's not done correctly, you might be stabbing someone with words. There is a way to do that, and you need to be mindful of it. And I think just being aware of it is step one, because you're not gonna, there's no blanket rule or principle that'll fix these things. But, can we be a society where we start being more cautious about these things? Whereas I feel like, with social media, it's the opposite. We live in a culture where it's sort of unfiltered. Just let it all rip. If, just put it all out there, everything. And I would just caution the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A joke that is funny to somebody on Tuesday may be the same joke may be incredibly hurtful on Thursday, depending on what's going on in that person's life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So we've established the fact that middle school is really, really hard, and that stress and anxiety are incredibly harmful and are a real serious issue. What are some of the things that parents can do to support their kids at this critical stage in their lives?
Well, I think one of the things that parents can do is really, go into their database of stories and experiences and sort of lead by example, which is, I think that, I come from a family of storytellers, mm-hmm. and I think one of the things that I think we could have done better as a family was we never really talked about our feelings. And so I kind of told myself this lie, which was, don't talk about feelings ever. It's not good, or it's not safe, or it's not polite. And that's just not true. It's not a true story. Whereas I feel like we as adults can sort of show people, like a good personal trainer, hey, this is the right way to do it. This is the right form to have. And so I think as adults, we can mirror people to say, hey, you know what? As an example, it's okay to be angry, but there's a right way to be angry, right? There's, being angry means that the things that you love are threatened, versus explosive anger that's just, not controllable, or sending the crazy text email. I, as an example, I try to always tell my nephews about the angry email, the angry text. It's always better if you sleep on it, right? Because as soon as you hit it, all you've done is lit the dynamite, and most of the time, 99 times out of 100, you're going to regret that decision. And so I think that, using the real life things that we've struggled with as adults as examples and sharing those stories with young people, I think is for a way to open up. And I'll just tell you that anecdotally through the book, because my entire book is story based, what it has allowed people to do is come up to me and say, that story you told in chapter 3, I really relate to that, or I really love that and then they insert their story. Mm-hmm. And so I think that stories are a really approachable way, because they're not lectury, right? They're not preachy. if an adult says, let me tell you the story about this thing I struggle with, you're basically creating a safe place for a young person to approach the same thing.
You know, I love that. And, you know, the Reading with Your Kids podcast, we're all about encouraging families to spend more time reading together, to grow closer through reading together. And we mean that not only with reading with our babies on our laps on the couch, but Tafolla Toro, this would be an amazingly powerful book for family to read together. Because it does what you say. It just, you know, we talk about the fact that reading a book could be a way to really kind of allow a kid to open up about something that's bothering them, to, you know, have a great way to have just a natural conversation about an issue that might be difficult. This would be a great way for a parent or an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, a caregiver to just kind of share some stories, you know, reading one of the stories in your book. And like you said, oh, this reminds me of when I was in middle school, and start sharing that way, and start sharing, as one of our guests in the past mentioned, your scar stories and some of the stories that, you know, some of the struggles that you went through, some of the failures that you had, that you were able to lift yourself out from and learn from and become stronger because of.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, you know, the goal that I've had for the book. And I've been so pleasantly surprised by the response that I've received since publishing the book, and what you're talking about has happened. Because I think that as an author, this is my second book. I really could not have told you if this story was going to resonate with young people. I mean, it would have been a complete guess. But what's happened is I've had a lot of parents tell me, I got a text from a guy, and he said, I just busted my 7th grader reading Tafolla Toro under the covers with a flashlight. And he said he can't put it down. And so I let him keep reading. And that was really cool, because what that tells me is that this kid is really resonating with the stories. And this kid, you know, he was a middle class kid. So I know this guy doesn't live in a bad neighborhood, but there was something in there that was resonating. And I think that now his father has a way to approach the subject matter and say, hey, let's talk about that guy that wrote the book. So now it's not you, it's not me, it's a safe kind of intermediary, right? It's a middleman. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about his story. And by the way, you know, have you ever dealt with anything like that? Or I had another friend of mine who's an executive at a big insurance company. She said, you know, her middle school kid was reading it, and he really loved it. And he was sort of like, Mom, did things like this really happen? And she was like, absolutely. And so all of a sudden, her son is having so much more empathy for and grateful for the world that he's growing up in, because he was like, I didn't know that happened in the same city that I lived in. Mm-hmm. And I think that what I'm hearing from parents is the book is creating the conditions for these really great conversations to happen around these topics that are normally very taboo and hard to talk about with young people.
Yeah. And one of the beautiful things about having these conversations is it's a foundation. You know, and one conversation about Lorenzo's experiences in middle school, it lays the foundation for another conversation, maybe 6 months or a year down the road, about something else that's bothering a kid. And that conversation builds, and it's just such a wonderful way to build trust with each other, just to continue that lifelong conversation that we all hope to have with our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, I'll give you just another quick anecdote. I was at this event, and this high school kid asked me, he said, what was the question? It was like, what can we do, or what can the adults do better, you know, around this topic? And I said, you know, and so I'm speaking to 1,000 kids at this event, and I said, let me tell you a couple of the lies that I told myself when I was at Tafolla. I told myself that the adults don't care, they don't understand what I'm going through, and they can't protect me. So those are 3 lies that I told myself. And at the very end of the book sort of climaxes in this really big gang fight where there was a bunch of guys, there were several gangs, and I was sort of with the punk rocker kind of, you know, grunge, you know, alternative music guys. That was my kind of crew. And this one gang really wanted to fight us, and we didn't want to fight them, but they really kept upping the pressure and the bullying. And so we were going to deal with it ourselves and try to figure out how we were going to get these guys. And right before it all goes down, the school led this sting operation, And all of a sudden, this huge fight broke out. The cops just came out of nowhere and broke this huge gang up. And so we didn't have to do anything. And it restored safety. But what I was telling the story to the kid, I said, look, I had written the adults off. And I said, the adults don't care, right? They don't know what's going on. They can't protect me. They did care. They did know what was going on. Mm-hmm. And they were using all of their resources to create safety for me. And so I was there, and I'm telling these kids, I said, look, you need to give the adults a chance, and you need to engage them and go first, because sometimes, like, you think they're not paying attention. They absolutely do. And so those were 3 lies that I told myself about the adults, that absolutely weren't true. And so I was challenging my audience to say, what are some of the lies that you have about adults? And maybe that's not the right story you should be telling yourself.
Yeah. And what a wonderful opportunity to just talk to your kids and sit down and just kind of go through a list. Hey, if you don't feel comfortable talking to me about something, who are the other adults in your life that you could talk to?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And just make it easy for the kids. So that way the kid doesn't have to rack their brain. It's like, okay, well, I'll have this ready for when those situations come up.
Right. Yeah, because in that audience, we're in the story. So in the story, the adults are everywhere. There was teachers that I loved. There was a police officer who was just so amazing. The police officer that was assigned at Tafolla was just unbelievable. The administrators, the teachers, my family, my parents, I'm the 6 or 7 kids. So everybody, there were 5 other siblings older than me that could have helped at any point, but I just chose not to engage them. And so I was sort of on a message that day to say, don't do what I did, because it caused so much pain and anxiety for me. And I don't want that for any young person to experience what I did.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I want young people to experience Tafolla Toro, 3 Years of Fear by Lorenzo Gomez. Lorenzo, where can folks go online to learn more about you and learn more about your books?
Yeah, so you can just go to lorenzogomez.com. I don't have Tafolla Toro up yet, but my first book, Cilantro Diaries, is on there. But the easiest way is on Amazon. If you go to amazon.com and type in Tafolla Toro or Lorenzo Gomez, it'll come up. And it's done really well, and you'll get it. It's available on Amazon Prime. It's also available through Barnes and Nobles and all the other big store retailers.
So, is there a follow-up to Tafolla Toro that's coming out?
No, it's funny. This, I sort of had always wanted to write this book, and it just turned into something really helpful. But I actually started my next book. My next book it's so weird. It's so completely different. It's about company culture. But I will tell you this, actually, it's not a follow-up, but there is a book I'm going to write in the next few years about mental illness. Tafolla Toro is about mental health. And what I always tell people is I go, I have a family member who is a paranoid schizophrenic, right? So they literally hear voices in their head. They have to take prescription medication for it. That's mental illness. That's like having cancer. It's something that they can't control, versus mental health, which is what this book's about. And the reason I wanted to write this book first is to say, hey, mental health is a choice. Just like choosing to drink water instead of soda and work on your nutrition, or go to the gym, or go for a walk and get some cardio. These are choices that you can make, and exercises and things you can do to have, good nutrition and physical health. Well, it's the same with mental health. And so here are a bunch of tools and exercises that you can do to sort of retake the battle for your mind, because a healthy body is worthless if your mind isn't healthy.
Amen. Amen. Well, we want everybody to check out Tafolla Toro, 3 Years of Fear by our guest, Lorenzo Gomez. Lorenzo, thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Jed. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Jennifer Swanson. Jennifer has a brand new book that you don't want to miss. It's called Save the Crash Test Dummies. That is the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, if you are the author of a great children's book, I would love to have you as a guest on the show. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. All you need to do is go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next easy steps. I want to thank the people who made today's show so very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank our guest, Lorenzo Gomez. Be sure to check out Lorenzo's website and his books. Also want to thank our sponsors, Kelly Bretner. Be sure to check out God Always Hears. And of course, we want you to check out Lucas in the Game of Chance by our friend Dr. Anthony Manna. I want to thank my amazing producer, Fatima Khan, for all she does for the show. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support that she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back. And I want to thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for making the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.